Hi, Penny Lane with jobcosting.com and Penny Lane U. In this short video, I'm going to show you how to enter cost transactions, so bills and expenses, in both QuickBooks Online and JobTread. Let's start out by looking at some important settings related to our cost entry process. Setting number 1. In JobTread, your global cost and time tracking settings. If you want to record your costs directly into QuickBooks Online, you need to make sure that this setting is tracked by cost code. Because QuickBooks does not see or communicate with the cost items directly, QuickBooks only is integrated with the cost codes. So if this setting is by cost item, what will happen is any costs coming in from QuickBooks will just all dump onto the first cost item on the budget that is mapped back to that cost code, and you could have 20, 30 items or even just 2 that are actually that same cost code. So you'll have some very undesirable results on your budget reports if you want to enter your cost directly in QuickBooks and you have this set track by cost item instead of track by cost code. If you're going to enter your cost directly into JobTread, you can have this set to track by cost item or by cost code. I recommend track by cost code for most customers because tracking by cost item can be very detailed and complex, and because it involves entering your costs directly into JobTread, only it can be restrictive and very data entry heavy. But we'll save the rest of that subject for another day. But if you want to enter in QuickBooks, you got to have this set up. If you want to enter your costs directly into QuickBooks, also in your integrations, in your QuickBooks Online integrations, you have to have this pull expenses feature turned on. Let's start with what it looks like to enter our expenses and bills into JobTread. There are 2 different ways. One way is to go straight to the job and choose the job and click plus document. When I'm here, I can choose one of my bill templates, whether it's a bill, a credit, or an expense. For this example, I'm just going to choose the bill template. They're really all pretty much the same. You'll notice that in this example, I have the choice to choose between options and between items and vendor orders. You would choose from vendor orders if you are using purchase orders in JobTread and you want to pull the expense against the purchase order that's in JobTread. Or we can enter directly onto this form right here. And I want you to notice that this is sorted by cost code. That's because my global cost setting is by cost code. If my global cost setting was by cost item, this would default to my entry by cost group. And this can be pretty important if you are entering your cost by cost item. For this example, I'm entering my cost by cost code anyway, so I can just go in here and enter my expense for this particular bill and then click create. From here, I can either approve for payment or record payment. I can either push it to QuickBooks Online or not push it to QuickBooks Online. If I'm pushing this transaction to QuickBooks Online, I'm going to have some additional options. I can push this as a bill or I can push this as an expense. If I'm pushing it as a bill, I don't need to choose any kind of account here because I may not be sure how I'm going to pay this bill. But if I choose an account here, that means that if I mark that bill paid later in JobTread, it will automatically post the bill payment into whatever account I've chosen here. But I will only push this as a bill if I have not paid it yet and I am paying it in sometime in the future. I can also record this bill payment on the QuickBooks side and it will mark the bill paid on the JobTread side. I can push this as an expense. And when I push it as an expense, I'm going to make sure that I choose which account this expense was paid out of. Either it came out of my checking account, out of my Visa, or maybe even out of my savings account. I also need to select whether or not I want to make this item billable, and I want to clarify that this is making the item billable in QuickBooks. Everything is pretty much billable in JobTread. So if I mark this billable, it's going to mark this transaction billable in QuickBooks. And I, in most cases, do not recommend that unless you're using some kind of workaround where you're creating your cost plus invoices in QuickBooks by pulling in the expenses, because you don't want a bunch of unbilled charges over in QuickBooks Online, as you will not be able to make those customers inactive. So from here, if I'm pushing this as an expense and I've chosen my account, then I can just record this expense now. If I'm pushing it as a bill, I can approve for payment. Now, approve for payment simply pushes it into QuickBooks Online as a bill now. As soon as I click record expense, this transaction is going to land over in QuickBooks Online, but I'm getting another chance just to double check my date and the account in QuickBooks that I'm paying it out of. And this is important because once I've saved a transaction in JobTread, it's really locked down. I can't edit anything about it. I can only delete and re-enter it. I can't edit the cost code or the payment account or the date. So this is a nice double check. So once I click this, now this is going to show up as a expense coming out of that register in QuickBooks Online. The other method that I can use to enter bills and expenses in JobTread is with this little record expense feature here. This one is nice because I don't have to click into the job, and I can actually add multiple jobs to one bill or receipt. The downside of entering multiple jobs to one bill or receipt is that JobTread will not post that in one transaction. It has to split the transaction out in QuickBooks. So if you have one transaction that you need to split between multiple jobs, I would recommend, if possible, that you use QuickBooks to record that transaction. Otherwise, even if it's an expense, you have to push it as a bill to QuickBooks and then pay it out of QuickBooks to one transaction. So that's just a little caveat on adding multiple jobs. I'm not going to add multiple jobs to this particular transaction right now. So I'm going to choose the vendor just like I did in my other option. And from here, I don't see the whole budget in front of me. I'm just very specifically choosing whatever cost code I want to choose. And it's only going to show me the cost codes that are actually on this budget. So here I can enter the amount, and if I need to enter additional cost codes, I can do that. If I want to enter another job, I can do that by clicking plus job over here, and now the job opens up so I can enter another job. Oop. And if I want to push this to QuickBooks Online as a bill, again, I would just click approve for payment, and this would push it into QuickBooks Online as a bill. It does not record a payment. That has to be done on the bill transaction itself or out of QuickBooks Online. If I push it as an expense, you'll notice that I'm actually only getting save as a draft for pushing this expense, and that's because I have multiple jobs on this transaction. If I have more than one job on the transaction, the first place this will have to go is into my cost inbox, which I'll show you what that looks like. If I did not have more than one job on this transaction, I can then choose, this is the account that it paid out of, and then as soon as I record the payment, it's going to show up in QuickBooks as an expense out of that account. Because I have multiple jobs on this cost transaction, I'm going to show you what that looks like. The only thing I can do is save it as a draft. And in that case, I really don't think that I want it to be a Visa transaction because it's going to show up as multiple transactions over there, but I could save it as a draft, and I'll show you what that looks like. And it's also a good opportunity for us to look at the cost inbox and see what that looks like. So the cost inbox is under documents, cost inbox. And this is where any drafts might live that I create. And you might do this for several reasons. It could be that your project managers are entering their cost transactions and they save them as drafts for the bookkeeper to come in here and then review and push to QuickBooks, or it could go the other way. You might have a VA or bookkeeper entering your costs in JobTread and then have your project managers reviewing, making sure the coding is correct, and then pushing it to QuickBooks. So what you can see though is that this transaction split into two different transactions, which is contrary to the idea for me, because now this is going to push us two transactions into QuickBooks Online. So it's a little bit cumbersome when it comes to recording expenses to more than one job, but I am going to show you a really cool trick. Remember how we talked about how once you save a transaction in JobTread, it can't be edited. So for example, let's say months later, I'm looking at my budget and I see that a transaction was recorded to the wrong cost code. I could actually come in here and correct that. My options are to delete and re-enter the transaction, or this, because if I update the transaction in QuickBooks Online, say I just change the cost code over there, great. It'll be changed in QuickBooks Online, but JobTread will not register that change. That expense or bill is locked down. So here's a little trick for moving things between cost codes. I could go and choose this job and say, oh shoot, oops, I better choose a job that has some cost codes on it. This cost went to plans and permits for $100, but actually I wanted it to go to specialties. And I can either send this change over to QuickBooks, or I can just make this change in JobTread. If I want to, I can also use this feature. It's kind of like doing a little journal entry. I can also use this feature to move a cost from one job to another job, but I can't send it to QuickBooks because QuickBooks doesn't, again, like to have this two job situation. So it gets a little messy if I want to send it to QuickBooks. But another thing that I want to point out about this is how would you enter a credit memo, a vendor credit, or a credit card refund? In JobTread, any kind of credit transaction is just created by creating a negative. So if I wanted to do a vendor credit or a refund, I would just go in here and I would put it to the correct cost code as a negative number, and I can either push it as a vendor credit. So that's going to go on as a vendor credit in QuickBooks Online, meaning later when I pay a bill for that vendor account, I can apply that credit to the bill and reduce the bill payment that I'm making, or I can push it as a credit card credit, which will actually push it directly into the credit card account as a refund. I cannot here record refunds directly to bank accounts like debit card refunds, unfortunately. That's how we enter costs and even adjustments to some of our costs in JobTread. Now let's pop over and see what our options are for cost entry in QuickBooks Online. As most of us know who work in QuickBooks, there are a couple of ways to enter cost transactions in QuickBooks Online. We can use the Quick Create to enter expenses, checks, or bills. For this example, let's just pop in to the expense form. The important thing to know about entering transactions on the expense form is that you do need to enter to the product service item level. So you need to enter any costs for job-related transactions in the item details section, because this is where the products and services live that are mapped back to our cost codes. So you're going to choose that here. You're going to put in the amount. You're going to choose the customer project. Make sure that you are actually hitting the job level and the job level that is connected to the job in JobTread. So that will show up there. If I were to enter this cost into a category, of course, you're still going to enter all of your overhead costs and everything into the categories, which is basically your chart of accounts, your expense accounts. But if I enter a job-related expense to a category and I choose the correct customer project, it will actually show up in QuickBooks or in JobTread on the budget, but it will show as uncategorized in the budget on the line item, which is very frustrating. So make sure that when we're entering our costs into QuickBooks Online that we are using the items, the product service item to do so. We can actually also use the bank feed area to record our transactions. You'll notice that I have a Home Depot charge here. I can select the vendor. Oops, I could select the vendor, Home Depot, the customer job, the product or service item. I could choose a category, but I'm not choosing a category because again, this is a job related expense. And then click post. And now this transaction will show up in JobTread as well as a cost to that line item. There are also some really awesome third-party apps that work through the QuickBooks Online side, like Controller and Dex are a couple of ones that we use currently that facilitate the communication and help to eliminate some of the data entry of cost entry, if you're interested in anything like that. If this transaction were a credit card refund, so the way we would enter credit card refunds or vendor credits in QuickBooks Online. So a credit card refund, again, we could choose the product or service and the customer project, and this is going to go back as a credit in QuickBooks Online. To enter a vendor credit in QuickBooks, you would do that just how you normally do. But again, any job-related transaction, we make sure that we are using the item details section and that we're pushing it to the customer or to the project or sub-customer that is to the project or customer that is syncing with JobTread. And that's it for cost entry in QuickBooks Online and JobTread. If you have any questions at all, be sure to reach out to support@jobtread.com.